Hey guys, what's up? My name is Jeff Lathrop, and today I wanted to walk you through my favorite node tree that I've created so far in 2025. Now, this is a product of the past 2 years of trial and error, actually starting out in Davinci Resolve about 2 years ago as a hobbyist, and over that time, slowly finding better and better ways to improve, and currently actually being a professional colorist and working on a feature film that has about 540 shots. Those shots are all over the place with different white balance and different exposure, and this is the exact node tree I'm using in that project, which is yielding me really great results. So why don't we jump into the Davinci Resolve color page, and I'll share exactly how this works, how to build it, each different node and what it does. And if you like it, you can use it or parts of it in your own color grading. Okay, so here we are in Davinci Resolve. I've got this clip of one of my friends in the forest, and he's actually out filming on an FX3, and I shot this on a Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K full frame. So if we go on and off, here is the raw footage, and here is my final adjustment, which honestly, raw or log footage compared to final is not a fair comparison. So let's take all of my adjustments off. Here's my Rec 709 footage, and here's what I was able to complete with this node tree. So I think that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this image. You can see it started off quite cool, and we've got it balanced to a much warmer, natural looking place. So I'll walk through these nodes one by one quite quickly just to explain what they are, and then we'll go back through them a second time to explain how to set them up and how to use them. So first off, we've got Color Space Transform In, which is taking my footage from B-RAW, Blackmagic RAW footage, into Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. And a very important note here is our project settings for color management. We're working with Davinci YRGB Color Science. Timeline is set to Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. And our output color space is Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. So we're taking our footage from RAW or log and we're turning it into Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. We're making all of these adjustments. And then our color space transform out is going from Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate into Rec 709. So going back through our node, we're starting off with our color space transform in to get the footage from log or raw into Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. And the reason we do that is because the Davinci Wide Gamut is a huge working color space. And let me pull up our CIE. So you can see Rec 709 is this little triangle here, and the Davinci Wide Gamut is a much larger triangle. So you can end up making finer tuning of your adjustments. And the tools just respond a little bit differently when you have your timeline color space set to Davinci Wide Gamut, which again, we've done in our color management here. Okay, so going back through our node tree here, color space transform in, I've got a white balance node, which is helping my footage go from this, I shot it a little bit too cool, bringing it back to normal. I've got an exposure node, which I was able to just brighten the image a little bit in this case. I have two nodes for saturation, which I'll explain in just a minute here. I've got a parallel instance of highs, midtones, and shadows, which I'm using to control my color contrast. I've got a trim node here in case I want to make any adjustments. If I've got my image to a nice place on these first several nodes, I might not want to touch those, and then I can make some adjustments here in my trim node without affecting anything I've done so far. And these first couple of nodes here are going to be the key nodes for getting your footage corrected. I mean, just look at those nodes are doing most of the heavy lifting. And then everything after that is going to be some fine tuning. And so we've got our color contrast coming through here with this first instance of parallel nodes. Trim node, I don't always use this, but like I said, this is kind of an overflow. So you can manipulate your image without messing up what you've already done. My second bank of parallel nodes here is for power windows. So this is going to help you isolate whatever part of the image is most important. You might want to add a vignette. You might need a gradient in order to draw some attention to, like, we don't really need any information down here in the bottom part. I kind of want to be focused on what is my actor doing. And so that's just helping me get that focus back where I want it to be. I've got a second trim node here. Again, if I want to make some adjustments at this point, after I've done all this work, I can do that. But you can see this node is not doing anything currently. I've got this node called Soft Clip. And if you look at the bottom part of my waveform here, You can see I'm just bringing my black level up slightly without adjusting anything else, and my contrast is not changing. And I like to set my waveform to about a 40 reference level on the bottom end. So I'm just dipping under that level there, and I know that this image is going to be safe for most displays. We've got our color space transform out, which is taking our footage from the Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate into Rec 709. And then I've got my Filmlet Creator node here, just to add a little bit of punch to the image at the very end. Okay, so now that we've walked through all these nodes, let's go ahead and right-click and grab a still. And if you click your gallery on the top left here, you can see there's my still. So right-click, grab a still, and your still shows up. Now I don't need two of these, so we'll delete one of them. And if we go ahead and delete all of these nodes and start from scratch, we'll build this node tree together so you can see all the nuances of what it takes to get that node tree the way I like to use it. So there it is again. There's our still, so we can always go back to that and reference it. And we'll start from scratch. So if you go Alt-S, you can add a node, or you can right-click, add node, add a corrector. If you just do that, it's gonna add the node all by itself. If you do Alt-S, you're adding serial nodes, okay? And if you do Shift-S, you can add a serial node behind the current one you're working on. Alt-S is gonna add one in front. Okay, so Alt-S, add a serial node, and let's add two just to get started. And these are gonna be our color space transform nodes. So go over here to your Effects tab on the top right. In the search bar, you can type color space, and let's drag and drop our color space transform onto the first one. Click over to our second node, drag and drop color space transform onto that. Now, this is gonna depend on what camera you shot with. For me, it is Blackmagic B-Raw. So I'm gonna input my color space, Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 4.5. My input gamma was Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. Okay, so now we see our first change, and we're gonna transform this into Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. All right, that's all we need to do on our first node. Let's right-click it and call it CST in. Jump over to our last node that we have so far, and we know that we just transformed this to Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate, so that's what our first two settings will be. And your output color space is going to be whatever display space you want to go to. And for most of us, this is going to be Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4. And when it comes to tone mapping, this is also going to depend on what camera you shot with. When I'm shooting C-Log 3, sometimes I don't like to use any tone mapping at all. But for B-Raw and other raw footages, I've found that Davinci works really well. And you can either use a custom max input of 10,000 or not. Sometimes this will help you control the upper ends a little bit better. Okay, so there we go. We've transformed our footage from whatever we shot, either log or raw, into Rec 709. Sweet, step one is complete. All right, so now we have our footage in Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate, which, if you recall, that's what our timeline color space is set to. So now we're off to a great start. So click back to your color space transform in, go ahead and do Alt-S to add a serial node, and let's right-click, node label this, balance. Now you can use your normal temp and tint controls, and let's jump over to our vector scope. So your vector scope is showing that your image is a little too cool right now. We can either warm this up by using the slider, and that looks okay. That actually works pretty well. Another method you can do is go to your HDR palette. You can use your global offset and warm it up this way. Now, I've never really liked using that method. I don't mind using the temperature slider. That actually looks pretty good to me. But my favorite method for this, if you right-click your node and you change your gamma to linear, now we can use our gain control to push this up into the right spot. And to me, this has always felt the most intuitive. And let's go right there. We got a pretty balanced image. On off, that adjustment's looking great. So that's our white balance node. We're using a linear gamma and then the gain wheel to control our white balance. Okay, pretty sweet. And that way you can stay in this primary color wheels. You don't have to worry about temp and tint, which can sometimes not perform as you want it to, and you don't have to jump over to your HDR tab to use your global offset. So this is my favorite method by far. Go ahead and try the different methods for yourself, see what you like better, and leave a comment down below if you have a different method than this that you think works better. Okay, so our balance is done. Let's go ahead and Alt-S. We'll add another node here for exposure. And when you're working in exposure, we'll go ahead and switch to our waveform. And there we've got our exposure levels of our whole image. So right-click, node label, exposure. Now there's a lot of different ways to do things in Davinci Resolve. So this is just the method I like using best. Some people are going to want to come over here to their curves, and maybe you'll use the ellipses, editable splines, drop the top down, raise up the middle by adjusting your spline. Click on the other bottom key here, and then you can add your contrast back in. Now using this curve can be a really great way to get your contrast where you want it. And actually that looks fairly good to me, but I'm going to reset this. My preference is using lift gamma gain for exposure, and I'm just going to gamma this up a little bit to get my exposure a little bit brighter where I want it. Now I'm liking that just a little better, but my contrast is not quite there. And I'm not too worried about my contrast yet, because if you remember, we're going to be using those 3 parallel nodes to use color contrast instead of just regular contrast here. But I don't mind using my contrast slider. However, a good note here, if you change your pivot to 0.336, you're going to preserve your middle, and look at that. So changing your pivot is going to lock in where your middle gray is, and Davinci Wide Gamut has a middle gray of 0.336. Now when you control your contrast, stuff is going to revolve around your middle gray point. And a really great reason to use this, if you have multiple cameras that you're shooting with, say you shot with a Canon and a Sony and a Blackmagic, they're all going to have different middle gray points. Once you get into Davinci Wide Gamut, all of those middle gray points are going to be the same because you're working in Davinci Wide Gamut. And Davinci Wide Gamut has a middle gray of 0.336. So it's kind of a pro tip if you're doing multicam and you don't want to remember what the middle gray is for each different camera, you can go ahead and just transform in Davinci Wide Gamut and then operate on a pivot of 0.336 in order to manage that middle gray and have better, more consistent results with your contrast. Okay, so now that we've got our balance and our exposure done, we can go ahead and Alt-S, add another serial node, and I'm going to add 2 this time. These are going to be our saturation nodes. So let's call this one HSV, and we'll call this one HSL. Now, the cool thing about saturation, and a lot of people, if you watch YouTube tutorials, have already talked about this. If you crank your saturation here, it just doesn't look right. But if you jump over to your HDR tab, you have a saturation down here, but it's still not my preferred method. What I like to do is subtractive saturation. So if you right click on this HSV node, change your color space to HSV, then you right click again, uncheck channel 1, uncheck channel 3. Now you can control your saturation by increasing your gamma and or your gain. And sometimes it's actually nice to increase gamma and decrease gain. And that to me is looking even better than the other 2 methods. Now you can test this and see what you think is best, but HSV is going to actually lower your exposure. See how our waveform is deepening here? So this is a subtractive saturation that's going to decrease your luminance and give you more color density in your saturation. And I really like the way that looks. However, if you have a scene that you want to retain brightness, you can use HSL, change your color space to HSL. And again, we're going to uncheck channels 1 and 2. And now, let's turn off our HSV real quick. Now, if we increase our gamma or our gain, it's getting a little brighter. Whereas here, it's getting a little deeper. HSV getting a little deeper. HSL is getting a little brighter. And if we use these together, now you've got really juicy saturation coming through. And we can go over to our vector scope. Look how much more information we're getting there. Okay, so those are my basic nodes for doing our color correction. Huge difference there. And maybe this HSL is coming in a little too hot, so let's bring that back down. I notice if you keep your gain around 1.9 and maybe, oh, I do like a little bit of gamma there. Use your gamma up to 5 and your gain up to 1.1. That's looking pretty good to me. All right, so our image is color corrected, and let's go ahead and add some parallel nodes. So go ahead and Alt-S, add a node, and then if you right-click on that node, you can go down to Add Node, Add Parallel, right-click on that node, go down to Add Node, and add another parallel. So now we've got our first instance of parallel nodes, and let's rename these node label high, node label mid, and node label, you could put low, or I like to put shadow. And now each of these adjustments on these nodes are going to be blended evenly through this mixer node. And let's go ahead and Alt-S, add another node here. And our color space transform out that we forgot to label, CST out, down here. Okay, so we don't need to worry about this CST out for a while because we've already managed that in our first step. And we're working with some color contrast. So our first nodes, we've just balanced our white balance and exposure and added some saturation. And now with these 3 parallel nodes, you can go ahead and add some interesting color. So for the shadow, if you are adjusting your lift, let's say I want to cool off the bottom part of my image. If you're doing lift, it's pretty drastic. But if you switch over here to your log wheel, let's add some blues into our shadow. It's much more subtle, and I feel like it's a way better way to finesse your image. So you can see here, we're getting some nice color contrast, adding some blues into the shadows. And then let's go back over to our primary color wheels, to our gain, and we'll add a little bit of warmth to our highs. So that's all I'm doing here, our highs and our shadows, adding some coolness to the shadows and some warmth to the highs. And in our shadows, let's actually go ahead and drop those down a little bit for a little bit more contrast. Now you can add contrast in your exposure node, or you can add your contrast by manipulating levels here in these parallel nodes. Okay, so now we're done with our color contrast, which has given us a little bit more punch, and I don't think I'm quite nailing this. You would spend a lot more time on this to get it finessed just the way you like it. I'm not sure I'm loving where this is sitting right now, but we're going to move on to power windows. So let's select our next node, right-click, add a node, add a parallel, and add another parallel. All right, so here is my first instance of power windows. And I'm going to show you something really cool here. So let's add this power window, which would be our main subject separator. And let's say we're going to gamma this up just to give him a little bit more separation, a little more highlight. And if you move this, you can really feather that window out so that it's, if you're right here, it's really obvious. But if you feather this out, it's a little bit more subtle. My second node, we'll go back over to our power windows, and I like to use a gradient from bottom up. Let's go here. And let's say for this one, we're going to go gamma down, or you could go to your HDR tab, take your global exposure and turn that down. For me, that ends up looking a little contrasty. And whenever I can, I'm usually reaching for gamma first to make these types of adjustments. And you can move this power window around a little bit to control how aggressive it is. You can also use this slider to control how much it's feathered and how far into the image you're going. For our third parallel node, back to our power windows, let's add another gradient. And I'm going to add this one from the top down. And I'm not going to use this right now, but we're going to save this as a fixed node tree. So when you get to other clips, if I click on this node, I'm going to have a power window gradient from bottom up. If I click on this one, I'll have the option to use it from top down. And our first one is going to be the vignette, which we can either use it vertical, we can use it horizontal, or reshape that as we need. But once we get this saved, these are going to be already in here, so we don't have to go through the step of adding these power windows every time to our node tree. And then my fourth one, I just like to leave that blank in case I want to use the magic mask or do any other specialty work. On this node, I just have a blank spot available to use. Now here's something really cool. If you click on your node that has a power window on it, you can Alt-S to add a serial. And if you plug in the bottom connection here, the alpha input, it's going to automatically invert that, which I actually don't want to do. So I'm going to go down to node key and we're going to reset this. So now look what happens. If you look at the icon here, this power window is affecting the inside, and this power window is affecting the outside. So you might want to add a little vignette here, or you might want to add some color here by either going into your lift and cooling everything but your power window or warming it. And again, maybe you want to do this with your log shadows to warm or cool your image a little bit. So let's do that for each node. We can Alt-S, and then let's connect our alpha input on the bottom, go down to our key control here, and reset it. Again, for here, right click, add node, add serial, connect your alpha input, go down to your key control box here, and reset it. And again, once more, we'll do Alt-S, connect your alpha input, make sure you're here on your node key button, and reset that. So now, all of these parallel nodes are doing the opposite of whatever these are doing. So this gives you ultimate control with your power windows to build them in this giant block of having your main adjustments here or some secondary adjustments to what you've already done. So say we brighten up our actor and then we want to darken the edges. We can do that right here between these two. And I'm only going to brighten him about 1 or 2 just to get some pop. And same thing. And I'm going to make sure this is nice and feathered. Let's on and off these 2 adjustments so we can see really drawing our eye into our actor here. And again, for this one, I'm just kind of darkening the bottom of the frame so our focus is on the top. And I'm liking where that's sitting. Okay, so now we've got our instance of power windows all set up, and that's working out pretty handy for us. If you click on your mixer node, Alt-S, we'll add that other trim node here, which again, I'm not always using this. Let's get rid of my effects tab. And Alt-S, we're going to go down here to our soft clip. Now jump back into our waveform, and you notice I have a reference level right here at 40. So you can click some of these adjustment buttons for your waveform, show reference levels. I've got reference levels set at 40 and 941. And my waveform is a 10-bit waveform showing data levels. Okay, so check your ellipses. You can change a couple of settings here for your waveform and vector scope. And then with these adjustments, you can either colorize your waveform or show your reference levels. And the reference levels are really nice to make sure that you're broadcast safe and your blacks are not too black. If you have your blacks set to about 40, they're going to appear dark and good on most displays. So with our soft clip, we can go over here to our curves and look at low soft. Watch what happens to my waveform. I can just bring that up. So I'm just going to bring that up to my 40 reference level. And let's look at my image. So my blacks are lightening a little bit here, but it's not really doing too much to my overall exposure of my scene. And I'm going to kind of adjust this I don't need that to be all the way at 40, but that's just a good reference level. And that's all I'm doing with soft clip. You can do the same thing for high soft. And you can see it's just bringing us down a little bit right here, but I'm not worried about that on this clip. So these clipping tools are really handy for keeping your exposure within bounds and not exceeding your reference levels too far. It's okay to exceed them a little bit. You can go 0 to 100, but I've noticed staying between 40 and about 95 or 950 is pretty handy. So either 4 and 95 or 40 and 950 are going to be some safe levels to be in. Okay, then we've got our color space transform out, which we've already talked about. And we can Alt-S and add one final node to this node tree. Go into your Effects tab, Film Look Creator, drag and drop this. And now our image gets a little wild, so let's go ahead, clean slate. Actually, I like using default 35. Take my color blend to 0.5. I'm going to take my film look to 0. And I'm going to leave the rest of these the way they are, except for if you scroll down to halation, let's take that off. And bloom, let's take that off. Grain, let's take that off. Don't want any flicker. Don't want any gate weave. And those are the ones that are, oh, and we can take off vignette here as well. So all I want is these default settings for my color, and I'm going to use about half of them. And let's on and off. That's giving me a little bit of an extra punch. And here we are. So this is the image we've settled on. And let's go ahead and move our soft clip and our film look creator, which I'll label that FLC. And we can on off these to see, okay, we're getting to a pretty good image. Now let's drag and drop my first method on here. It looks like I'm liking this one a little better. I spent some more time on this to get my exposure in the right place. But that's my node tree that I'm using. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comment below. I'm still figuring out the best way to do these tutorials and talk through the things that I'm learning. It's actually pretty hard to go through all these and explain them in a way that's going to make sense and be concise. But go ahead and practice with this node tree. Let me know what you think. And again, hopefully you found it helpful. All right, thanks. Bye.